We have a problem. Oh, wait, before we get to the problem, I forgot something. Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. Okay, we have a problem. Foreign peoples are trying to censor our press. Foreign peoples are trying to squelch our freedom of speech. That might sound conspiratorially ridiculous, delusional, paranoid, but it's not at all paranoid. When Korea, assuming that North Korea was the entity that hacked into Sony, the effort was to stop a movie, The Interview, that had something rather disgusting, the idea of assassinating a living head of state. But disgusting is often the name of the game when it comes to freedom of the press, because disgusting is often the way that we express criticism. The real problem came a week ago with the killings of 12 people at Charlie Hebdo, the French satirical magazine. It echoed a problem we had several years ago with Danish cartoons that the Moslems did not like, and they rioted against those cartoons. People were killed in those riots. In 2005, there was a meeting of the Organization of Islamic Countries. And that organization, according to a female Muslim author, Asra Nomani, in the Washington Post, that group got together and decided, and here are words from its own statement of what it decided, to encourage moderation and to encourage tolerance. Well, that sounds wonderful. The Islamic world is riddled with forms of racism. For example, anti-Semitism, the same kinds of anti-Semitism that Adolf Hitler used in Germany from 1933 to the year of the Holocaust, 1943. But they did not, the Organization of Islamic Nations did not mean that they would encourage tolerance and moderation within their world. They meant that they would attempt to use the words moderation and tolerance to muzzle you and me. That's when, according to Asra Nomani, the campaign that has used the word Islamophobia as a stick to beat us with became an operational term for a new strategy. And the result of that meeting, says Asra, is a blasphemy police. Now, there are blasphemy police, there are religious police in Iran and Saudi Arabia that will come down on you if they feel that your skirt isn't long enough, if they feel that your clothing, your hijab, does not cover enough of your face, if they feel you are in any way transgressing against the religion. And of course, the punishment for blasphemy is death. Now we have those religious police in the West, and they descend on people like Asra Nomani and attack her. The result is that there are things about Islam that we are not supposed to know. And it is vital for people like you and me to find those things and to make them clear to the public. One of those things is the procreational rate, the rate of demographic explosion, the population bomb among Muslim communities in the West. It's not a population bomb that's imploding, it's a population bomb that's exploding, but we're not supposed to talk about it. In 2005, when I had written a new version of my first book, The Lucifer Principle, A Scientific Expedition into the Forces of History, I'd made the book twice as long in the new version because I had a book stuck in me. It's the book that is now known as the Muhammad Code, and I pushed it into the middle of the book for good reason. That book, The Lucifer Principle, is about the battle between superorganisms that have memes, ideas, alive in their brains that they use to compete for position in a pecking order. And the rise of Islam since 622 AD is the most astonishing story in history of the rise of a social group, of its coagulating as a superorganism. And then, using a meme, a set of ideas planted in its forehead, has worked to establish, to rise constantly in the pecking order of nations. And one of the things that I pointed out was all of the criticisms of Muslim communities in Europe for deliberately out-reproducing, radically out-reproducing the Christian populations, the native populations, the indigenous populations, the French, the Germans, the English, all over the Western world. My editor said, "You can't put that in this book. That's racism." he was exercising the kind of self-censorship that the meeting in 2005 of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Countries, was trying to inculcate at the cost of what appears to be a great deal of money. The result is, I ran across a few years later a simple fact. My editor was wrong. The so-called alarmists, the so-called extremists who had written articles claiming that Europe would be a Muslim-majority continent by roughly 2050, they were not operating off of racism. They were not off, maybe they were, but their facts were right. There was support for what they said, and the greatest source of support for what they said comes from a guy named Ali Mazrui. Ali Mazrui was a population demographer, a social scientist. He eventually became the Albert Schweitzer Professor in the Humanities and Director of the Institute of Global Cultural Studies at the State University of New York at Binghamton. He was considered so lofty a figure that he was given a budget by PBS for a 9-part series called The Africans. And Ali Mazrui wrote an article in a journal so obscure that he was sure that you and I would never see it. And it proved that the statements of the so-called alarmists about a population explosion of Islam in the West designed to take over the West were not a crazy fantasy, not at all. In his article, Ali Mazrui talked about, well, he didn't mention it, but there's a hadith that Asr Nomani brings up that says, Marry, for I will outnumber peoples by you. That's what Ali Mazrui was talking about in his piece. He said, wait, let's turn the page here so I can read you stuff that he actually said, and I don't have to do it off the top of the head, that he said, this is what Ali Mazrui said. His article was called Islamic Doctrine and the Politics of Induced Fertility Change, an African Perspective, and it appeared in Population and Development Review in a supplement called The New Politics of Population, Conflict and Consensus in Family Planning. These are some of the things that Ali Mazrui said. The culture of procreation merges with the culture of combat. Fundamentalist Muslim families in Africa and elsewhere may resort to having more and more children as a strategy of, quote, multiplying in the name of Allah, close quote. Procreation itself can be counted as a form of jihad. The Muslim Ummah, that is the global community of Muslims, is allowed to expand by divine intervention and biological impregnation. Studies indicate, says Mazrui, that Muslims have the highest rates of population growth in sub-Saharan Africa. Islamic African fertility rates have sometimes been seen as part of a global Islamic phenomenon. A global Islamic phenomenon. Expansion, not only by conversion, but even more by procreation. This, says Mazrui, becomes a case of competitive procreation. Competitive procreation, competing to take over the world by having more children than everybody else. Back to Mazrui's words. Arabized Sudanese, you wondered why the Janjaweed groups of Arabs were descending on villages of black non-Arab southerners in the Sudan and wiping out the villages but raping all of the women in sight. Here's an explanation from Ali Mazrui. He says, Arabized Sudanese from the north of the country have been known to vow not only to create more Muslims by conversion in the south, but also to create more Arabs by intermarriage with black southerners. The children would be Arab if the father was Arab, regardless of the mother's religion or ethnicity. And the cry, he says, was, I am going south to bring into the world 40 more Arabs before I die. Why the rape? I leave you to figure it out. Mazrui goes on, since the Iranian Revolution of 1979 to 1980, proselytism in Africa in favor of Shiite conversions has expanded significantly. The Islamic Republic of Iran probably regards Africa as second only to the Middle East as an area known for it's an area, quote, ready for Islamic resurgence, close quote. Subsidies from Iran for Muslim publications and activism in Africa increased dramatically in the 1980s. The Shiite direction from Tehran has recently become more visible internationally. And here's how Ali Mazrui explains how Islam can take over entire continents. Yes, entire continents, North America, Europe, continents, via competitive procreation, the jihad of procreation. Here's Ali Mazrui's words. Islam originally arrived in Africa as a religion on the run. The first Muslim refugees arrived in Ethiopia early in the 7th century AD, fleeing from persecution in a polytheistic Arabia. The refugees presumably decided that intermarrying with Ethiopians and having large families was a way to strengthen their kinship ties in the Horn of Africa and to expand their local Muslim communities in exile. The first great muezzin in the history of Islam was Ethiopian, the famous Bilal, one of the Prophet Muhammad's favorite disciples. Islam's culture of procreation included racial intermarriage from the start. The second significant arrival of Islam in Africa occurred in Egypt in AD 639. This is only 7 years after the death of Muhammad. This time, the Arabs arrived as conquerors rather than as refugees. But how was the Egyptian population not only converted to another religion, Islamization, but also transformed into Arabs, Arabization, over the centuries? How was this Arabization accomplished in the rest of North Africa and in much of the Nile Valley as well? Historically, the culture of procreation among the conquering Arabs reinforced their jihad culture of combat. North Africa and much of the Nile Valley were Arabized as much by Arab intermarriage as by Arab conquest. The patrilineal system of Arabs was part of their population policy, destined to transform a continent and destined to affect the world. By the 20th century, what's the result of all this competitive procreation, this jihad by means of the womb? Says Ali Mazrui, by the 20th century, Islam had changed Africa more through intermarriage and procreation than through war or combat culture. By the end of the 20th century, half the population of Africa was professing Islam. Now we have another set of words that is very useful here. It comes from a Norwegian imam, the same imam, Mullah Krekar, who declared that the Danish cartoons were an act of war against Islam. And he said a few months ago, just look at the development within Europe, where the number of Muslims is expanding like mosquitoes. Every Western woman in the European Union is producing an average of 1.4 children. Every Muslim woman in the same countries is producing 3.5 children. Our way of thinking will prove more powerful than yours. And we are not supposed to discuss this because it's considered racism. We are not supposed to discuss this because it's considered Islamophobia. We are not supposed to try to see whether these contentions, these ideas, the notion of competitive procreation overcoming Europe by 2050, 2000, only, what is that, 36 years, 35 years from now. We're not supposed to discuss this as a serious possibility when people in the Muslim world, all the way from Ali Mazrui, a highly dignified academic, to an imam who wants a jihad, but an imam in Norway, of all places. These people are allowed to discuss this. You and I are not. That is censorship from foreign peoples imposed upon us. I'm sorry, we believe in freedom of speech. We do not believe in hate speech, but we do believe in calling the shots, looking for the facts, and saying truths to the best of our limited abilities. It is time for us to ignore the word Islamophobia. It is a stick being used to beat your tongue into submission. This is Howard the Humongous speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. And now it's time for that brand new, silver, svelte, but totally invisible little off button, and to see if I can get it right.